Ladies, gentlemen, and sentinels of all ages, the Chrono Odyssey closed beta test is upon us, and with people diving into the game for the first time, you may well be wondering either, firstly, which of the three classes in the beta you should play, meaning what the actual weapons and playstyles are like for each class, and then if you want a bit of advice on how to build them, as far as in this beta period, I will have some recommendations as well. Especially as this beta is only for early level gameplay, you can absolutely get by using any class and any weapon for that class, but for anyone looking for some fun concepts to build towards or around, the things that felt the best to us in our advanced playtest of the beta, where we tried all three classes, and that's what that section is going to be for. First up then, let's talk about how the classes work really quick in general. There will be 6 classes in the game on full release, but there are only 3 of them currently in this closed beta test. These are the Swordsman, the Berserker, and the Ranger. Each of these fills a notably different role in general and has different playstyles from each other, though Berserker and Swordsman definitely have a little bit of overlap in some of their skills. Each class has access to 3 different weapon types, and you can swap weapons in combat, but only between 2 weapons at any given time. As you defeat enemies with a weapon, you will gain weapon mastery experience. This is separate from normal experience and player levels, and weapon mastery levels are what give you skill points to then spend on your actual weapon skills. Generally speaking, for all the weapons that I've seen, the left and right side of the skill tree are for active skills, and then the middle track right down the middle is for passives. Usually skills on the left track for each weapon will all synergize together in some way with each other, and these skills in the right track will synergize together with each other as well. There are some cases where there will be some crossed synergy, meaning a skill from the left track that works with the ones on the right track, but for the most part, you're going to want to stick mostly to either left or right side on each weapon for your active skills, and then of course pick up any passives you consider to be relevant in the middle. The skills that you want to pick up early are those with low cooldowns, and oftentimes these are also the ones that cost your class resource to use. These are your more spammable attacks, and it's good to have them around. Further down each track, you will start to find skills that are generally longer cooldown, but much larger effect. An example of this is the way that I built my Berserker. The main spender skill that I chose for Battle Axe was Whirlwind, which spins around and then builds up stacks as it hits enemies to give you a buff. The final skill at the bottom of the side of the track in the weapon mastery tree with Whirlwind was a big high damage upheaval type move with a really long cooldown, but it did significantly more damage for each stack of the Whirlwind buff that you have. So using that skill without Whirlwind is pretty lackluster, it doesn't really make sense, but using it with Whirlwind and purposely focusing it around the Whirlwind buff stacks is a very natural synergy that can do a lot of good damage. That said, with that out of the way, let's talk about each class and what they can do, starting with Swordsman. This is by far the simplest class, not only in the beta, but also including from what we know about the other 3 classes that aren't available yet. This class has access to the sword and shield weapon, it has dual blades as an option, and it can also wield a full Greatsword. As for how these weapons function, the sword and shield weapon specifically is very tanking focused. It has damage reductions and threat generators among its skill, as well as stamina resource management and block synergies throughout, because the right click while using this weapon is just a straight up hold to block attacks and reduce their incoming damage significantly. When you block an attack, you will also generate Rage, which is your class resource, and you will also have a special animation on a timed block that knocks enemies down, which is pretty much like a parry. If you follow up any block with a left click, you also get a special counterattack, and for the most part, this weapon pretty much is just, do you want to tank? If yes, equip. Otherwise, it doesn't have too much else to offer. The second weapon choice then is Dual Blades, a pair of swords wielded together. This is your most consistent sustained damage option among the weapons, with some great basic attack damage, but also some powerful skills on relatively short cooldowns or with relatively small resource costs. This is the weapon based around super quick hits for the class, and it is a surprisingly malleable weapon as well, depending on which skills you choose to take. It has one that increases threat generation, which makes it great for pairing with the sword and shield for a tanking style, but it also has a skill that reduces threat generation, which is sort of the opposite, making it great for going a non-tanking route and pairing with the Greatsword instead. instead. The right click for dual blades is also a block, sort of like Sword and Shield, but unlike the Sword and Shield, there is no specific timed parry mechanic. You just have to time the block well to begin with to actually get to block. And there is also no counterattack follow-up after a block, you just reduce incoming damage and generate a little bit of rage when successful. This weapon also has the least crowd control options of any weapon for the class, and so it is of course advisable to mix it in with one of the other two weapons for that purpose. Except the final weapon for this class is Greatsword, big, meaty weapon. Slower hits but more damage on each hit individually. The idea of this one is that a lot of the damage of the weapon comes from its really long cooldown attacks or its larger charged abilities. And then it has some good rage generation methods and some good crowd control options. The right click with Greatsword is a charged attack that gives you rage when you let it go, giving more rage per charge level you had when released. This weapon also has access to things like Bleed, which is a damage over time effect you can build up on enemies, and so it sort of lends itself well to weapon swapping, as you can do things like build up rage, apply bleed stacks, and then use your high cooldown skills, then swap off to a different weapon after you've done all of that. On which note, as for the recommendations on how to play this class in the closed beta test if you want them, Hollow was the player on our channel who played loads of Swordsman in our advanced playtest, and the way that he felt most comfortable playing after messing around with it was to use dual blades as the majority of his actual damage output, while swapping to the Greatsword for crowd control and for rage generation for the most part, but using dual blades as his main actual fighting weapon, as it simply was able to output the most damage, at least in low-level gameplay. Next up we have the Berserker class. This one felt pretty good in the beta, but in my opinion will definitely feel better in the full game when we have access to more gear and the full kit that each class should have access to. The weapons that Berserker has are chain blades, which is always an awesome concept when used in games, as well as twin axes, which is exactly as it says on the tin, a pair of axes, and then the battle axe, which is your big, meaty, great axe that has tanking options on the actual weapon. As for what these weapons actually do then, the chain blades are the higher range option for the class, not being a literal ranged weapon, but having longer reach than the other melee choices. It can apply chill as a debuff, which slows enemies down. It can apply freeze, which is basically just a stun when you apply enough chill. It can group enemies up by pulling them together, and otherwise it just can output a pretty decent amount of damage as well. The main mechanic of the weapon is called Bloodthirst, which is a stacking buff that you can build on yourself to get health regeneration per second and increased damage per stack as well. A lot of the skills when using this weapon actually cost your health to use, and so this regen is meant to somewhat make up for that cost. The right click when using chain blades consumes all of your stacks of Bloodthirst to give you health regen and a pile of rage to spend on your skills. This was solid for a lot of the more menial combat, and especially with the right click involved, it gave a decent amount of healing, but I found that anytime I went against a properly tough target, I was struggling to really sustain my health due to the health cost on the skills. So I could see this being really good later in the game when you have actual healing properly, but in the lower level section in this closed beta test, it was definitely not my preferred weapon among the three. Definitely a good weapon for swapping on and off though, to use some of the massive amounts of CC and the range that the weapon has. Then the second weapon for this class is the twin axes. These are definitely shorter range than the chain blades, and their main purpose is purely damage, but in a slightly funky way. The twin axes are a weapon meant to scale damage based on how much health you don't have, how much health you are missing. So the lower health you are in the moment, the more effective your damage will be with this weapon. Not to mention that it also has ways to spend your health, including the right click for this weapon, which is a main part of it. The right click for twin axes is a special mode you can activate or deactivate to enter a frenzied state. While active, you gain increased damage and movement speed, but you lose health every second. So you basically just actively trade health for damage and speed at every stage when using this weapon. This is another really fun concept to me, and it even has options in the weapon mastery tree for a skill that makes you unable to die for a short period of time, so you can really abuse this and play at 1 health for the whole duration of that skill. But like the chain blades, I just found it a bit awkward to use a health draining weapon in low level content where we just don't have that much healing yet. That said, the weapon also had skills that can lower the defense of enemies, which is a really strong thing to be able to do when playing in groups, as it makes everyone's damage stronger, not only your own, and it can also pick up a skill that lowers the enemy's damage output, meaning it is a great potential pairing for a tank setup on this class as well, or even just to obviously assist your tank if it's a different player. Then we have the third weapon, which was my personal favorite in the playtest at least, which is the Battle Axe. This is the tank-focused weapon for Berserker. If you want a tanky playstyle, it has a passive that gives you super armor after any skill cast, which means that you can effectively just ignore any flinching from enemies. It has skills that consume health to give large shields, as well as just ways to build shields in general, which are very effective for survivability. This weapon also applies bleeds as a damage over time effect, it has some crowd control options built into it too, and it has rage generation options on it as well. The right click for the Battle Axe is just a straight up blocking stance, reducing incoming damage, and not much else. None of that fancy stuff that the Swordsman gets while blocking like counterattacks or rage generation, it's just a block. Though, of course, you can also spec into some passives that synergize with the block function too if you want to, or even there is a skill that acts as a parry and counterattack after a block if you choose it. That said, Battle Axe is not an exclusively tanking weapon, despite what you might think when looking at it, because the other side of the skill tree, the side that isn't based around tanking, is fully based around Whirlwind, which is a classic beloved skill archetype in RPGs with big weapons, where you just hold the button down and you spin and you spin and you keep spinning and you do damage to everything around you as you move. I personally am a very big Whirlwind enjoyer, and this weapon has a full side of its tree dedicated to Whirlwind and Whirlwind synergies. So if you like spinning, like I do, Berserker is such a fun choice. That said, as far as recommendations on how to play the class during the closed beta test, if you are looking for some, when I played Berserker, I did try the various weapons, and while I found twin axes and chain blades to be fun and powerful in short bursts, the health draining was an issue for sustained damage. So I mostly stuck to the Battle Axe in a lot of my gameplay and just playing around Whirlwind and Bleed damage over time, especially because there's a passive that gives you barrier generation after a certain number of hits against bleeding enemies, and you can also make Whirlwind itself apply bleed, and Whirlwind itself is of course very fast amounts of hits per time and hits multiple things around you, so you can just keep spinning and spinning between lots of enemies to gain a barrier so quickly that barely anything can kill you even if you underlevel it significantly, and then you can just launch off the giant attack that scales based off of your Whirlwind stacks. It's just a really fun playstyle in general that I found did quite a bit of damage too. Then the final class in the closed beta then is the Ranger. Like the others, this class has access to 3 weapon types, being the bow, the rapier, and then dual hand crossbows. Starting with the bow, the right click for this one is actually just an aimed shot because the ranged weapons function slightly differently, with the actual special mechanic for bow being on the Alt key instead. This lets you select between various arrow types, impact arrow being a standard arrow, flaming arrow applying the burn damage over time effect, frost arrow applying chill and even freeze at maximum stacks, the poison arrow applying poison damage over time and reducing enemy healing, and explosive arrows detonating a few seconds after being shot to explode in a small radius around them. It's worth mentioning that all ranged weapons in this game so far at least have headshot damage multipliers, so hitting an enemy in the head will do notably more damage than hitting them elsewhere, making this weapon just quite aim dependent compared to the other ones. Generally though, this weapon has quite a bit of versatility, and the main purpose seems to be the variety offered through the special arrow type mechanic, but according to Josh, who was our ranger player in the playtest, the bow just didn't feel too great in the lower level gameplay stages. Then the next weapon for this class is the rapier, which is your melee weapon here. For the most part, if you are choosing Ranger as your class, it probably isn't because of the melee weapon that it has, but from everything I've seen, it is quite the cool option for a singular melee weapon. It's very evasive, very dodgy, and the skills for it are mostly split between either leaning into critical damage or leaning into damage over time, with crit being the more active playstyle that you want if you are choosing to use Rapier as your main damage weapon choice, and damage over time being the better choice if you just want to apply some poison and then swap weapons over to something else. It's also worth noting that while both of the ranged weapon options for this class consume your resource for basic attacks, the Rapier does not, so it's always a decent choice to have as your second weapon slot. Then the third weapon for this class is the dual hand crossbows, and these were an absolute favorite among those that we talked to about the playtest. This weapon is still an aim requirement, precision ranged weapon like the bow. It has a headshot multiplier like the bow, but unlike the bow, it is way faster. You don't have to worry about charging shots, it's way more maneuverable, and the damage output is quite consistent with this one. If bow is like the Greatsword of Ranger, then crossbows are like the dual blades of Ranger, to the point that even the special mechanic for Crossbow is a flipping evasive maneuver to dodge attacks while also firing arrows in motion. This is essentially your purest damage option for the class, and if you are someone who has decent aim, then this weapon will feel incredible to use with the game's combat. That said, as far as our recommendation on a way to play the Ranger class in the closed beta test, the way that Josh played it in the playtest for the most part was focusing on the hand crossbows above anything else. He leaned a bit more into the damage over time side of things with it, and then using the bow as a secondary weapon choice, mostly just for dealing with larger groups of enemies, as he found it had a bit better AoE management potential and crowd control options too. If you at any point feel like you are running out of your class resource just from basic attacks, you can work in the Rapier instead of the bow as the second weapon option, but with good skill management, you don't really need to do that. That covers the beta classes then, but just for the sake of, talking about every class that we know will be in the game on launch and the information that we have, there is also going to be the Sorcerer, the Assassin, and the Paladin. The Sorcerer is going to have a staff that focuses mostly on dealing destructive magic and damaging options. It will have access to a magical orb that will focus mostly on buffing allies or debuffing enemies, and it will also have a Grimoire, which is a weapon that will mostly be used for healing allies, which is a very group-focused option. The Assassin will have a saber, which is their katana-like weapon we've seen in some gameplay footage briefly, with big, sweeping animations. They've also got wrist blades, which are their ultra-fast, tiny weapon dual combo, for which I would expect a high focus on pure sustained damage, like the other smaller fast weapon archetypes. And then our third weapon for this class is the musket, a full-on gun as a ranged weapon. And my sort of guess or speculation, based purely around the weapon fantasy of a musket, is that this will probably have some really high damage, but also high cooldown skill options, and will probably require precision aiming headshots to really make the most out of it. Then the final class is going to be the Paladin, which is one that I'm personally quite intrigued by, and this will have a lance and shield combo, which is mostly just a tanking option with threat generation and survivability. They will have a big two-handed halberd, which is more of your pure damage weapon type, and then they will have a mace and shield combo that is supposed to be a healing option for keeping your allies alive. So this class will have the option of being either a tank or a healer, and then just halberd is your main DPS choice, so I'm really interested to see how that will play out, especially in a solo setting as a result. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A detailed breakdown of each class that you can choose between in the Chrono Odyssey closed beta test, along with some recommendations of playstyle if you're looking for some guidance. Then just a quick roundup of the information that we currently know for the other three classes too. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and if you are playing the game this weekend, make sure to share your feedback about it wherever you can, far and wide and loudly. This is a proper closed beta test, meaning things can and will change before the release of this game. So if there is something you think should change for whatever reason, this is the time to tell the developers. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.